You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
A mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, thank you, Thumper, and welcome to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Today we have a very, very special guest and a very special friend of mine, Harry Booyens. And Harry is an Afrikaner who is now living in British Columbia. But Harry's got an important message, and I first became aware of Harry when I read his book, Amahulu. And that book is a very, very complete and thorough history of South Africa from when the Dutch first landed at the Cape and when they actually started settling there, and it runs all the way through current times. A tremendous history of South Africa. And of course, I was always interested in the history of South Africa, but after reading this book, I felt like it would be very important to bring Harry onto the radio, because I believe that his story had to be heard by a lot more people, and people needed to understand what's going on in South Africa. Harry, welcome to the radio program, and I want to start with giving you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your background as well, and some of the accomplishments that you've had in your life.
Well, thanks for having me here, Dan. I appreciate that. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm a scientist, a physicist, PhD physicist, and I was born in the early 1950s in a city called Port Elizabeth at the very southern tip of Africa, in South Africa. As I've told folks, there was nothing between me and the South Pole except the Russian Navy, or the Soviet Navy. And somewhere around 1957, I wasn't quite 4 years old, my mother picked me up in her arms and pointed out a star. It was moving, and she called it Sputnik. And from that moment on, I knew I was going to be a scientist. And I was no longer going to be either a jet pilot or a farmer like my grandfather, or an engineer on the railways like my dad wanted me to be, any of that stuff. And so that's indeed what I eventually became. I worked for, I guess, a lifetime in the research and development field, mostly around aerospace and defense in South Africa. Spent some time at IBM in New York over that part of my life. And then eventually in 2000, we moved to Canada, more particularly Vancouver. Canadians found a way of getting me here, and I've been working largely in the intellectual property world, helping high-tech companies. But my love for history remained, and obviously my interest in the country of my birth remained. And in about 2006, 2007, when these horrific farm murders really started picking up in South Africa, I felt that someone had to say something about it. And I sort of looked over my shoulder and there was no one else. So I figured, well, Harry, you learned in your life as a scientist how to express yourself, hopefully coherently. I guess you're it. You're going to have to put this story on paper. And so that's what I did. Took me about 7 years. I got the information out of 7 different countries and eventually wrote this lot up, published it in 2013. And that's about the size of it there.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's incidentally, your book is really an amazing history, because you not only get into the history of the country, but also a lot of the genealogy, a lot of the historical data on the people who migrated to Africa.
Kind of little story around that. I originally put together, let's call it an article, a very extended one of about 80 pages that I put on the internet. And a Canadian colleague of mine read this lot, a lady, and she said, look, this has got to be a book. So I told her, but what is it that got you? And she said, the little bits about family, just ordinary life in South Africa. There were sections where you talked about what happened at home and so forth. And I told her, but there's a problem. No one's ever going to understand South Africa unless they've heard the history. And I wasn't born back then. I can only account for the 50s onward. And what do I do about that? And she said, I don't know. You're the author, figure it out. So, very North American way of looking at it. And I think I should thank her for that, because that's when I remembered that my mother-in-law had done a little bit of genealogy. And I figured, well, I wasn't around back in the 1600s, but my ancestors were. So I guess I got to figure them all out and see what I can find out about all of them. And so about 1/3 of this book is going back through history and placing individuals in the period, at the place, at the time, as things happened in that country, which I guess brought it a little bit more alive for folks. And the interesting thing about South Africa in that respect is that since the initial group of people were only around 200 at the Cape of Good Hope, it means that pretty much every long-established South African family has some or other member present at the Cape in that founding period. So everyone from South Africa can find his ancestors somewhere in that book in the early pages. And one of those ancestors came from New York in 1666. And I kept that American connection all the way through the book. I tried in every chapter to say, well, and at the same time in America, here was the issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've done a good job, and let's talk about the history. You've called South Africa the second America, and I certainly understand your rationale in calling it that, because it really is a parallel history. If you look at South Africa, and let's start in 1653, and let's find out just exactly how it parallels what was happening in what is now the United States at the time.
Yeah. Well, I called South Africa the second America because that's what Rear Admiral Thomas Pringle said back in 1797, 2 years after the Brits had taken the Cape. And his exact words were, as this colony improved and its peoples increased, it would to us only prove a second America and would more likely, in time, rob us of India. They'd been severely burned by the American War of Independence, and they weren't going to let that happen again. So they were pretty much sure that they're going to keep their thumb on us. And so we're the second America that never quite made it.
Well, with that, though, I want you to talk about the history. From the time that your forefathers landed at the Cape of Good Hope And I think our audience needs to understand that all these claims of Afrikaners, the whites, stealing the land from the poor blacks that were there. Let's talk about that. Let's put that in the right context.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of images. I don't know if Thumper can help us with those.
I'm ready when you are.
I've got image 1A, which should help a lot.
All righty. That's the Africa one, right?
Yes, says Geography 1652.
Let's go ahead and continue
Okay.
the discussion there.
Yeah, if folks can see that image, it shows the southern tip of Africa, obviously focused on South Africa. And if you look at that, there's what I would call the God-given aspects that no man can do anything about. And you can see some of them right there. Probably the most important is you can see the Tropic of Capricorn. And now, when you look at that lot, it means that the northern tip of South Africa is outlined with a blue broken line. That's its border. So there's a tiny little piece that sticks into the tropics right in the north, where the central brown arrow is going. And for the rest, it pretty much coincides with the latitude of the southern parts of the United States, and thereby also with Europe. So in a sense, what you should do is see South Africa as the Europe of the southern hemisphere, just upside down. Mm-hmm. Now, on the eastern coast, you see a warm current running south from the equator, and on the western coast, you see a cold current go up. That is profoundly important, because that warm current in the east makes the east more humid with higher rainfall, and the cold current on the west makes that the west coast is a desert. Mm-hmm. There's a broken green line running across it with 350 millimeter summer rain written at the bottom. That's pretty much literally it. To the east of that line, you get 350 millimeters of rain in summer, and to the west, you don't make that grade. They get some rain in winter, much like California, and just like California, it's pretty much stopped by the mountain. If you look at the geography, you'll notice that there's a pretty continuous range of mountains sitting like a horseshoe just in from the sea, or 100 miles in from the sea. Varies between 5 and about 100 miles from the sea. Particularly in the east, those mountains are up to 12,000 foot high. They stop pretty much anything that smells of rain. The result is that to the east of that green line, the high interior inside that horseshoe of mountains, where it says 6,000 foot freezing winter prairie, that's exactly what it is. It's 6,000 foot freezing winter prairie, and it doesn't get any rain in winter. A little bit, tiny bit near the mountains, but for practical purposes, no rain. That's to the east of that green line. In the interior, it is summer rainfall, and it comes in thunderstorms, which Americans know well, particularly in flyover country. So then if you look further up north in the center of the country, you'll see the Great African Sand Basin, and below it, it says no surface water, Kalahari Desert. For those folks who have ever seen a movie called The Gods Must Be Crazy, and pretty much anyone I've ever met has seen it, that's the area where the San Bushmen, S-A-N, the San Bushman people used to live. There's still a handful of them there. And I don't think anybody else knows how to really survive there. So what I'm trying to convey to you is that that dotted green line, the broken green line, is profoundly important in not just the history, but in the sociology and the politics and the demographics and everything in South Africa. It's pretty much all about that line. And the next point I would raise has to then do with the actual history. I don't know if there's any questions you wanted to ask me.
Well, no, Harry, I just wanted to go ahead and flesh out exactly why that dotted green line or dashed green line is so important.
Alrighty. If you look at the brown arrows coming down out of the northeast of the continent, those are the migration lines of the indigenous black people. They are called Bantu. That's the racial grouping, is Bantu. Ntu means black, and the Ba prefix just means people. So it's the black people. And that's what they call themselves. I spoke to a guy from Uganda here outside my door the other day, and he looked at me and he says, "Do you know the word Bantu?" Of course I know the word. Yeah. So even in Uganda, that's the terminology they use. For the record, Uganda is over the horizon in this drawing. Now, the black people were moving towards South Africa from the northeast, and they came in branches. One very important branch, and it is the majority of the people in South Africa, in fact in Southern Africa, is the Nguni. That is a collective noun for a collection of different nations, and among them would be Nelson Mandela's Amakaza people, and among them would be the AmaZulu. You know them as the Zulu. Ama just is another way of saying people, so it's the Zulu people, the AmaZulu. And there's a string of those, the Amakosa, Amapondu, Amatembu, AmaZulu, Amaswazi, Amashangan, and so they go up like a string of pearls up the East Coast. The ones that got further south are the Xhosa people, or the Amaxhosa. They are Nelson Mandela's people. They were further south. But you see, I've written there, that blue line, Mtamvuna River, that's pretty much where the coastal Bantu people were when the Dutch arrived at the Cape. So they were 700 miles away from Cape Town. And people don't seem to understand that. They think that there were black people at the Cape when the Dutch landed. It's a lie. That's spelled L-I-E, if there's any confusion. Okay, it just never happened. I'm sorry if I get sarcastic sometimes, but the things said about South Africa are so outrageously wrong that one gets sarcastic and cynical after a while. You look at another brown arrow. That would be Tswana, so the far interior. There they go. And they came down an arrangement of rivers, and you can see them move south, but they hit the drier country. So they were coming down the African savanna and bush on the edge of the desert. That's the route they came along. Their languages are very different from the Nguni. So among them, you would talk about the Ba Tswana, whereas along the coast, you will talk about the AmaZulu. The languages are basically different. One major branch of them, fairly early on, broke away and moved further southeastward along the foot of the mountains, and they are called the Sotho groups of nations. The Tswana largely remained one nation. The Sotho broke in two, well, actually in three groups, which we can get to a little bit later. Then you see a group in the middle called the Venda that came independently from the north, the far north, V-E-N-D-A. I've listed them there because those are the people of the new president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. They're the Venda or Vavenda, Bavenda, depends on who you're speaking to. And let the record show that they arrived within the confines of this blue dotted border of South Africa at pretty much the same time as the Dutch arrived at the Cape, possibly a few years later. So they arrived up there in that little tropical bit of South Africa. They arrived there the same time the Dutch arrived. So every time the present president of South Africa mouths off about who is an immigrant and who is not, remember this bit. His people arrived the same time as my ancestors. So I'm not going to have him lecture me on stuff like that.
Harry, if I might ask, what prompted these groups to migrate south?
It's not always entirely clear, but it may have been a population explosion. And then there's also a social structural thing, which I know for a fact is true for the coastal guys in South Africa. In other words, the bottom end of the Nguni arrow. I cannot swear that it's the same further up north in history. But the thing that happens with the guys coming along the coast is the king would marry a number of wives. The first wife is not always the number one wife. She may be something in the nature almost of a practice wife. But ultimately, it will be determined who's the number one wife, and the first son of the number one wife will essentially become the number one son, and he gets to take the throne when the father gives it up. Usually the father has to die. All the other first sons of the other wives, or the immediate brothers of the number one son, they have to go and find another patch, and they get given people to go with them. These become their advisors. They are often the guys who were initiated with him in the same camp, the initiation camp, but they had to then find more land. And you can think, if the king is marrying a drove of wives and having a drove of sons, and all of them have to find a place to live, you've got this expanding almost pudding of people running across the country, and they had to live somewhere. And so what they did is they spread southward as long as they had 350 millimeter minimum rain, because that is what every farmer will tell you. That's what you need for long grass. Without the long grass, you're not going to have cows. You can keep goats and you can keep sheep because they will graze on short grass. But a cow, for cattle, you need long grass. For that, you need more rain. And to the west of that green line, you just didn't really have enough to sustain the kind of herds that these black people had. So it was a different kind of humanity that lived west of that line, and I can get to that. So that's the picture. The black people of Africa ended up living to the east of the green line. They were moving towards it, but they were running into a couple of barriers. One, the line itself. Two, the fact that it is abject desert further into the interior. And that 6,000-foot freezing winter prairie is not something that you would generally associate with half-naked African tribesmen in your National Geographic. So, I mean, I could ask you, how many pictures have you seen of half-naked African tribesmen standing in the snow?
Right.
It doesn't happen so often. Now I can show you black African people in the snow. They do occur, and that's in that little bit in the middle of the country. If Thumper can move that cursor of his just to the southeast of the word winter prairie, to the southeast of it.
Right there.
Down to the right. You'll see that right there. That's a country. That's an independent country. You can thank Britain for that. Britain gave it independence in the 1960s. That's where the Basotho people live, and that's snow country, and they actually had to learn how to live there because they were chased there by the Zulu. So that was their hidey hole. They fled there. That's basically it. But other than that, you can see that from a general demographic point of view, these folks are tropical people. They come from north of the Tropic of Capricorn. They can't really make it they're not going to make it in South Dakota, guys.
Well, certainly not in their traditional format. Now, what you're showing here, Harry, is that basically the part of South Africa that is being claimed, well, the whole country is being claimed as being black, and that you are invaders. The white Dutch that settled in that country invaded and really took away their land. But the reality is that they were occupying less than a third of what is now South Africa at the time that the Dutch landed there. Is that right?
Well, take us to the next image, 1B, and then that might show some of them. Because they really lived mostly to the east of the mountain ranges along the coast, and then in the interior, they lived mostly at the western end of that freezing winter prairie area, which is more tropical. Temperatures are more moderate, and they could make their living there. But this central prairie, they had no mechanism to farm it. The idea of dryland farming on a flat piece of Kansas, let's call it Kansas, is probably a closer approximation. They didn't have the technology for farming that. They had no idea. And so they never seriously occupied that central spot. Now, a lot of their politicians, not the ordinary black folks, the politicians are trying to say that, when white people moved in there, they stole our land and I don't know what else. They apparently are just forgetting 200 years of history very comfortably. Mm-hmm. And some of that I can show on these maps. So if image 1B could be put up there, it would be great.
Okay, 1B.
Let's see, that is image 1B up there.
We're still seeing the original one.
No, this is not the original.
Actually, this is different.
This shows 1779. So.
Okay. So if you look right at the bottom, okay, now I can see it's changed. I said they're the Great Fish River. By around 1780, let's round it up. By around 1780, we had the first frontier war, and that happened at that the river called the Fish River. And as you can see, it's pretty much on the green line. So that became the line, that blue Fish River there, became the border between white and black for the next basically until 1994, practically. So that's always been the historic border. And when the British came along later, they then crossed that river and they did take land off the black people. But you'd have a hard time finding a regular long-time Afrikaner family in South Africa that does not recognize the area to the east of the Fish River as fundamentally being black country. That's only the fair thing to say in my book. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so as you go east from that blue line, you'd first have Mandela's Xhosa people who came in two heaps that seemed to like fighting each other. The southernmost ones were called the Chagabe, and they often allied with the whites. In fact, they allied with my own family ancestor and his guys to fight against the others. The others lived further east, and their spin-off sons that went looking for land tended to cause problems by crossing this river, and that's where the fight starts. So it's that social structure thing that kept on pushing these black folks over that river. And of course, they would fight amongst one another like princes do, and they'd murder out one another, and then they'd flee west because the whites were far less threatening than their own guys. And then there are these other nations further up, and when you see that first kink in that brown line, that's Zululand, and that's where the Zulus were, who were not a significant nation until about 1816, and then all hell broke loose. And the period from 1816 to 1836, those 20 years, are generally called the Mfekane in isiXhosa, and it's called the Difekane in Zulu. And that's when largely the Zulu people went, they were built as a nation. Their leader and founder, Shaka, there's no other way to put it, but he went on the rampage. He attacked everybody in every direction. He chased some of the nations all the way to the equator. So it disrupted Southern Africa all the way to the equator, to Lake Nyasa and further north. And to the west, he crossed the mountains and started wiping out the Sotho people who fled into the mountains. And to the south, he chased all his competitor Nguni friends. He chased them all in a huddle against the Fish River boundary. He made a complete mess of the place. And I have a map quite a bit later that gets to that. So I was thinking I could get to that in a minute if we might just go to image 2A from here and cover two loose points that might help folks understand. And then I'll get back to this Mfekane thing because it's a big deal. All right. So I wanted to mention that folks probably have some difficulty understanding the idea of Africa and snow. So my image 2A that I'm calling for shows you what the 12,000-foot Drakensberg or Dragon Mountains look like in winter in South Africa. That's it. I think you'll agree with me. It's a little bit difficult for I'm going to keep using the phrase, a half-naked African tribesman to make his way across those mountains to the interior. And that's the reason why the coastal Nguni people, like the Zulu and the Xhosa, that's why they stayed along the coast, while the Sotho and the Tswana people stayed in the interior. And that's pretty much the way it stayed until 1816. And after that, the Zulu leader Shaka started making attacks across the low part of that mountain, about 200 miles north of the point you're looking at the moment in the picture. That's it. So I can pick up my story about this Mfekane thing and what the Zulus did to the rest once we've heard a little bit from Hendrik.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thanks for having me. I just have to mention that we've got sporadic power cuts over this site. Our national grid, Eskom, is bankrupt, like many other government institutions. And they've got a schedule when the power goes off to save, put some people into power in some areas. So I'm sitting here with a UPS and in the dark as well, and I'm chatting to you guys. So I'd like to give you an overview of how things are on the inside, and if you have any questions, please ask me. I'm not sure. I'll probably start with, we've got a new ambassador to South Africa, US ambassador. The lady's name is Lana Mark, and she was born in South Africa. And the last time we had a US ambassador in South Africa was 2016. The US ambassador that time was a gentleman by the name of Patrick Gaspard. Maybe just if you can just show that link. Gaspard was actually, he's actually now the president of the Open Society. So I'm sure your listeners probably knows who the Open Society is. And the founder of the Open Society, of course, is George Soros. So I think Lana Marks has got some big shoes to fill after he left, and many of us are following her on Twitter, and it looks strategically like she's meeting up with influential people. For instance, I see the last one she met was Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey is currently in the country, as maybe your listeners knows this, but she's got a school for academy for girls here in South Africa. And interestingly, I think last week, a lot of the people on Twitter and in the media, also a guy is Richard Branson. Apologies that I jumped. Richard Branson is also in the country, and he came to start a new entrepreneurship funding for the country. And one of the photos he posted was a photo of him and probably his management that worked on this project, and they were mostly white. And a lot of people complained about this, say there's not enough diversity. And interestingly, when Lana Marks went to visit Oprah, she was also there for a girl's graduation and so forth. But if you go and look at Oprah Winfrey's school for girls, they were all black. There's no white girls in those group photos or training. So there's no diversity there. So I think that actually says a lot of where the country is right now in this unbalanced stage. I think there's no diversity. It's just a word. It's the same with we've spoken about this before. Black economic empowerment, for instance, is being pushed aggressively now in companies, in corporates. So that there's a very imbalance in racial demographics, because that's one of the things the ANC is pushing, is to say in every company, and generally in South Africa, the company needs to represent the demographic of South Africa in the population section. So let's say if you've got 6% whites, it's got to reflect, let's say, with 6% in the company of whites. But it's not like that anymore. You'll read in the newspapers as well, it's most management is black and so on. But I can tell you, as I've moved in these companies, it's not the case. It is sad to say it's black nationalism to the core, and it also boils down to all the companies going bankrupt. It's a lot of people are being put into these places because of race, of their connections, and it's not what you can do for your country, but what your country can do for you. And that's why we're in this mess at the moment.
Hendrik, may I ask, so what did Lana Marks have to say about the land thing?
She was, General talk, Gary, is very politically correct. She does say President Trump didn't really mean what he said. And
okay, then you don't need to explain any further. She's on the wrong side of the truth.
Yes, you actually, and you know what? For a moment when we started following her, you'd think Obama is still president.
Really?
And that's the confusing part about it all.
I figured that might be what's going to happen.
Well, Hendrik, to talk about how the infrastructure of the country, the condition of the country right now. You were talking about the electrical grid, but just in general, since the end of apartheid and since the ANC took over the country, just talk about the general direction of the country as far as is it improving? Is it getting, is the infrastructure getting better, or is it falling apart?
Well, Dan, it's a good question. I mean, the country it's like everything is collapsing. I mean, the post office is bankrupt, the municipalities are bankrupt, the corruption is just so deep ingrained. It's and of course, this corruption is unfortunately attached to this race ideology being pushed by the ANC. So you can see the decline. But I would also say you can see the decline really if you go out of the cities and you go into the smaller towns. SAA, the South African National Airways, they're in bank and in rescue now at this moment to try and save them. One of the unions is still a large power base over here, and Ramaphosa, the president, had a chance now to break these unions like Thatcher did in the 80s. But I think he's between a rock and a hard place, if I look at it that way, because one of the unions actually said, if you declare SAA bankrupt and those people lose their job, we will turn the country in darkness for a week and make the mother of all strike if you do that. And funny enough, after that, the ANC quickly came up with money to pay for the salaries of these people. Wanted, I'm not so sure how much pay rise they wanted. That's what these unions do. You know, when the companies are going bankrupt, they go on strikes to get increases for these. But yeah, they scrubbed out this money from somewhere, and now they're in this debt rescue, this national airline. The water is really in a bad state. Our rivers are in a bad state. It's I mean, with apartheid in 40 years, the ANC has done just the opposite in a little bit more than half of that time. And you know, they'll still blame apartheid. But, you know, it's the writing's on the wall. They don't need white monopoly capital. They don't need white enemies. They don't need stereotype. They're doing an outstanding job all by themselves, stereotyping themselves. So,
you know, in 340 years, we managed to build a country that was something like Canada. The ANC has managed to break it down to a banana republic that looks like Rwanda in just 20 years.
The social unrest, the crime rate, areas like this. Talk about that, Hendrik. Talk about what is going on in the countryside. I know that when you talk to tourists, they're thrilled with South Africa when they're around these resorts. But what happens when you get outside of the resort?
Yeah, but then the thing is, many people, when they go to South Africa, they go to Cape Town. Now, Cape Town is, I would say, similar to your, you know, what you say, San Francisco, Los Angeles. And many Americans would go to Cape Town and they'll say they've been to South Africa. No, you've not been to South Africa. You've just been to a city. And it's the same with tourists. Once you start traveling and you go to places like more north, Johannesburg, and maybe Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, those provinces, more things happen. Burnt, I don't know how many, was it now? I think nearly 1,000 trucks over this year that they've burnt. Going on strike, or next they would, maybe if the trucks just go along the road, they'll start taking stuff out of the truck.
We're talking about
some of the stuff sorry, Terry.
Just to give it in terminology the folks here would understand, these are like 18-wheeler heavy-duty haulers, right? Mm-hmm. They just jump these
definitely.
Start burning them.
And in Cape Town, I remember that 2 weeks ago, they burnt trains. You know, if just 2 days ago, a school was burned down because the kids the black kids didn't get the marks they want. Another story came out of a lecturer that was murdered because she didn't let somebody pass. So, a lot of tourists been killed, raped, and it just doesn't seem to make any news. It's just part of crime. But many of these tourists comes here with ideas that, the way Hollywood portray Africa and South Africa. And unfortunately, you can't come here with those ideas.
I think they're going to go on safari to Johannesburg. It isn't that way. I was thinking with what Hendrik has been saying, if you want to understand where it comes from, I got a video clip number 6. If we could possibly get video clip number 6, which is Black First, Land First, telling you to your face what this is about. I think all you have to see is that little clip and you will understand what this is. And our little Ocasio-Cortez girlie could particularly take note. This is where she's taking your country.
Okay, I'll have it up there for you in just a moment.
But Black First, Land First is a group, a political group, very much like the Black Lives Matter on steroids, and they will tell you in their own words what all this is about. And the speaker is going to use the word you. The word you means anyone who's not black. They're very clear about that. Yeah. And this particular clip's number 6. So the point is that this woman was being interviewed by a Canadian visitor, and they fortunately spoke the truth, the way that they are going about it. So it's a little bit like Black Lives Matter actually speaking the truth. So you're going to hear Black First, Land First tell you exactly why the things are happening that Hendrik is talking about. Shouldn't be surprising.
Well, Hendrik, while we're waiting for that clip to...
We don't want your handovers. We don't want you to feel pity for us. We are coming for you and we are going to get everything that you own. It's ours.
Talking to South Africa's black political class, it's quite...
That's the story. That's it. So this young Canadian lady was interviewing them and she hit exactly the right spot. That is Black First, Land First. And now you understand what South Africa is about, okay? If you're white, you didn't earn what you got. What you've got doesn't belong to you. We're coming for you. You don't look like us. We want everything you got. Period. End of statement. What else would you like to discuss?
Yeah, well, and Hendrik, your comment about it, if you're out in the outlying areas and you happen to be a white person in some of these outlying areas, let's talk about the Boers. Let's talk about the white farmers and some of the things that are going on there right now as we speak.
All right, and the farm murders, maybe you've got new listeners. We've got a huge problem with white people being killed on farms, and it's not just normal killings. It would be deemed in America, it would be deemed as hate crimes. But because we are white, we don't get that privilege, and we don't have that law in South Africa. But something we always have to remind our listeners, because people get confused, is we are a minority. We are only 4 million people, and we have about 50 million plus black Africans here. I think many times people sit in Europe or America and they think we are like a majority like they are, or close to losing that majority. But we're not. Tiny minority. And on these farms, we are scarcely separated and populated across the country. And so these people are easy targets on farms. And it's the most horrendous murders that takes place. Just on Twitter, if people follow on Twitter, it's happening every week. The stuff is just so happening so much, you don't even post it anymore. People are just desensitized to this stuff now. But one of the main guys that's, kind of the Marxist is Malema, Julius Malema. He is a Marxist. He openly talks about, it's not the right time to kill people just yet, white people just yet. Just this week, he said we should get used to the idea that we are racists. What he said this week. So he likes stirring the pot. Maybe just if you show that Thumper.
Okay, which
The one I just sent, that link, the last one.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, like SAA, the South African Airways got a white CEO now, and a lot of the people complained that's what I call is black and privileged in these companies, and they didn't like this white guy being appointed because they're giving each other handout in tenders and so on. But what's interesting as well is that the media here wants to compare President Trump to Malema. If you can show the next one there, Thumper. And this is the type, I mean, it's actually laughable because Trump is more on the conservative side, where Julius Malema is a Marxist, left-wing extremist Marxist. Can you show that one, Thumper?
Yes, just, okay, I got it.
Hendrik, can I mention that I have sent 2 clips to Thumper, the one with Malema dancing on stage singing Kill the Boer, and the other one where he talks about not quite ready to kill whites just yet. I've got both those clips standing ready.
Great, thanks, Harry. That can link in. But look at this. This is typical, that Marianne Sam, that journalist. All the left-wing, they just don't give a balanced view of President Trump and the good things he does. The media in this country is just left-wing. So they want to compare President Trump to this idiot, this genocidal idiot. You know, it's just, it's hilarious. But
we're not used to that. We're not used to that around here in the United States. Our media isn't left wing or anything. It's as a matter of fact, our whole world right now is controlled by Marxists, by people who believe in collectivism.
And Dan, have I just heard a sarcastic American for the first time in my life?
You don't hang out on Patriot Soapbox, do you?
Yeah, you can hang out.
You need to check this out.
So this is Harry. I'm hoping you can play my video clip number 5, which will put it all in context for you, because right now you're seeing stills and you don't hear this creature doing what he actually does. If you hear clip 5, you will understand immediately. And Hendrik won't have to explain so much about who Julius Malema is, because the creature will speak for himself.
Well, and the fact is, Harry, he's not the first, because Jacob Zuma did the same thing on stage, correct?
Yeah, he did.
Yes, he did, yeah.
Are you ready to play this now, Harry?
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
You're playing number 7. That's it.
Okay, there we go. My apologies.
There you go. That's it. Yep.
Is that the video?
Shoot to kill, shoot to kill 'em. Kiss the poor, the farmer. Kiss the poor, the farmer.
And unfortunately, with the slow data rate we got at the moment, you're not seeing what's really happening. He's making his right hand into the shape of a gun, and when he yells, "Prr, pa, pa," he's making like he's shooting with his gun, and he's basically yelling, shoot to kill, then prr, pa, 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 and then it's kiss the Boer. He's not saying kill because he was told in court he's not allowed to say kill, but his audience obviously knows he means kill. So that is Julius Malema. So Trump is being compared with this particular creature, this agglomeration of DNA.
Thumper, would you, can you go back to that screen you just had up there? Because there was a clip on there where Julius Malema was saying that he would also, that they needed to kill the white man.
Cut the throat of the white man?
Yeah, if you go back, there was one. I've got it
ready to go here. Just a second here.
I mean, if in fact we use this kind of racist, inflammatory comments to talk about other races, about the black man, we would be the most horrible racist, nasty human beings alive. And yet somehow that standard doesn't hold if it's against white people.
Okay.
Correct.
Let me play this.
Why not Mashaba? Why not Soli and all of that? Because the mayor of DA in PE is a white man. So these people, when you want to hit them hard, go after a white man. They feel a terrible pain because you have touched a white man.
Okay, just for copyright issues, we're going to stop it here for a couple of seconds.
Okay.
I don't think that's one I sent. Is that yours, Hendrik?
Actually,
No,
this was
mine. No.
it was one of the advertised videos that I think Dan saw on the screen there.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so all right,
No.
well, let's.
Excellent. Go ahead and play a little more if we can.
Yeah, we'll go here.
Not because Mashaba and Soli will not be touched. They will be touched. Don't worry. But we are starting with this whiteness. We are cutting the throat of whiteness.
Okay, we can stop it here for a couple of seconds. And, yeah, he's sitting there saying we can cut the throat of the white man. Wow.
Yes. So while we're on that topic, the video that I marked number 4 is where he's interviewed, and he makes one of the statements that caused people to react. And so maybe you want to play my clip 4,
Okay.
because he's actually interviewed by a Turkish television service.
Okay, well, I think we got what we needed from this one. Is that okay with you, Dan?
Yeah, one thing Harry and Hendrik talk about the importance of Julius Malema. He is not just an average, person in the country. Talk about his role in the country.
He's the leader of the third biggest party.
And I think he's got about 2 million supporters, give or take. Now, if there is trouble in the country, you can just imagine how much trouble 2 million people can cause on top of all this criminality and everything going on. But I want to mention, if you move around in corporate, at big companies, international companies, you would be surprised how many of the black people in these companies are EFF supporters. It seems like even next door now in Namibia, there's a big EFF following. So there's even, it looks like sabotage, like places like National Telecommunications Network were also moved in, where there's guys working in this organization that would do things to bring the network down. There was a recent video that went around as well for Eskom, again, the national grid, just not far from me, where somebody took a video. The black guy was in this white neighborhood, just went up with the stairs with a ladder, cut the electric cables and run away. Now, normally, these guys should do it at night and steal these cables, but this was clearly just sabotage to get the power grid down. And a lot of these is expected to be these unions and these EFF members, but they're very militant and they're very linked in with international Marxist organizations. I would also say the Black Land, First Land, that one that Harry mentioned earlier, they've got links, and I saw some of these communication going with the Black Panthers in America, which is very extremist. And I don't have proof for this, but I've got a very good idea that there's money being funneled between these organizations. The Black Panthers also came to South Africa a while back to make connection with these black nationalist groups and with this anti-white narrative as well. So the EFF fits into this, and they're just more prominent because they're the biggest one.
Well, let's talk about the let's talk about the ANC. I mean, this was the third biggest group, but the ANC, the African National Conference, isn't it also very racist and very anti-white and very Marxist as well?
Well, the leader of the ANC was basically Nelson Mandela, and as you know, he was declared to have been a senior guy in the Communist Party. The night he died, the Communist Party ran to the microphones to make sure the world heard that. And so there's never been any doubt about that. They're in a three ways, coalition, essentially, with the Communist Party and the biggest union group, or the union grouping in South Africa. When you look at this taking the land thing, the chairman of that is probably the foremost communist in the country. So you cannot separate the ANC from communism. And if you were to play my image number 11, you would see their history of what they did, because I've mapped out the bombs that they placed in the 1986 period just around the area where my mother lived at the time. I just don't know. It strikes me, Thumper, it takes a while to get videos and images set up. That building that you see there is the Sanlam Center in Amanzimtoti, south of Durban. And my mother used to live about 2/3 of the way up in that building. And then on 23 December 1985, the ANC planted a bomb in that supermarket and killed white women and children. The ANC has now renamed the street in front of that building after the bomber. So imagine the Alfred P. Murrah building having the street, or that I know the building is now missing, but there's a memorial in America on that. Imagine the street past there being, renamed Timothy McVeigh Avenue. That's what the ANC has done. So they support such things. They pray to it. It's unbelievable. They laud it. And the clip just before that, which would be image number 10, would actually show how many bombs they planted around the 1986 period in the area north of that building. So my mother lived through two bombs being planted in that building of hers, and then further up in Durban itself. Now you've skipped that one again, I think. It's image 10. Yeah, so that shows you what they did. Sorry, while we have the picture, I might as well just talk to it quickly. You can see 1980, 81, 82, 83, 84. Those were the numbers of open terrorist attacks by the ANC. And then on 10 February 1985, the state president at the time offered Mandela release if he was prepared to proceed in a peaceful fashion. He refused, and look what happened immediately. So we don't have to speak in words. We can just look at the numbers. Look what they did. Okay? Look what happens to terror attacks on civilians. It goes from 0, 5, 2, 7, and 4 to 41, 30, 32, and 37. Among those are anti-tank landmines that killed farmers and their families. If you look at the attack on civil structures, they practically disappeared. It was not such a big deal anymore. Attacks on the police increased dramatically. So there's no doubt what the basic nature of the ANC is. It is a terrorist organization and was listed as such by the Reagan administration. The man who did that was Bush Sr., and it was Bush Jr. who took them off the list in 2008.
And Nelson Mandela had been in prison for 27 years, but he was offered clemency if he would just swear off the violence. He was actually a bomb maker for the ANC, isn't that correct?
I'm not so sure he was a bomb maker as such. He was trained in making bombs. He was trained in that in Ethiopia, in a sort of an Al-Qaeda-like camp. He went there for military training, and he became the founder of the military wing of the ANC. So, folks, please mustn't come at me with this bit about he's this angel of peace. That is garbage. It's absolute garbage.
Well, the only place in the world that would name him Man of the Year would be the UN. And that's astounding to me. That shows the makeup of the UN, the fact that he was named the Man of the Year by the United Nations.
Well, just to finish this particular line of thought, is there a chance that we could show image number 12? Because that would, I think, seal the point. It will show you the bombs that were placed by the ANC just around Durban.
Wow.
And I got the dates there, 85, 86, 86, 85. So the 85, 86 period. Those are all the bombs placed by the ANC. These are ones that actually went off. Hang on, there's only one that didn't go off, and that's the second one at Amanzimtoti. You see there in February of 86, the very lowest one on the map. Having blown up my mother's apartment building, they came back for a second shot, and this time she was actually near the bomb, and the police pretty much picked her up and dragged her off to get her away from this lot. So this stuff gets to touch families directly. It may be just a political statement for most people. It's not real. Mandela's people basically, on 2 occasions, as far as I'm concerned, tried to kill my mother. And they killed various people in that process. If you look near the top of that map, you see May 1986 on the right-hand side of the map, or close to the right. It says Magoo's Bar.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's in downtown Joburg. The guy who placed that bomb was later made police chief by the ANC. What does that tell you about the ANC?
Wow.
The guy, that's like making Timothy McVeigh the police chief in Oklahoma City, okay? That's what you're dealing with here. It's that mindset. That is the mindset that's running the country.
Correct. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, Harry, because there's many. It's just the one guy. I just spoke to somebody today of one of the guys that's in the army, one of these, during the transition, the South African Defence Force, Apartheid Defence Force, took in these MK fighters and UPLA fighters, which were terrorists. They're running the army now. Most of the whites has been driven out.
You're going to have to translate that for the guys. They don't know what MK and UPLA and that kind of
stuff. So that is the ANC's military wing.
Okay.
I just heard today one of the guys that planted a bomb is an officer in one of these bases here. So there's many of these guys that planted bombs still in their jobs. I remember one UPLA member, they were more of the extreme side of the black nationalists, that shot, I think, about 5 white guys in Tempe in Bloemfontein. I can't remember the year, but that guy's still in the army. You know, nothing happened to him.
Yeah, but guys, it's worse than that. I mean, the attack on the church in Cape Town, what was it, 1983, when a bunch of these creatures attacked a church with 1,000 people congregation, threw hand grenades with nails taped to them into the congregation, shot them up with AK-47s, then ran out the door and tried to drive off. One of the parishioners had a gun on him and actually went after them and wounded one. The guy who sent those people to attack the church, he's in Parliament, representing, but that's the country. That's what you have. I want to put this in words that regular people will understand. When Western civilization comes to an end, this is what happens. This is what it looks like. Take a good look and weep.
Well, as a matter of fact, those of us that are like the Patriot soapbox, Harry, we recognize that what happened in South Africa is now happening in the United States of America. And we need to learn the lessons from what has happened in South Africa. Hendrik, you're certainly someone who can tell people firsthand, understanding that the police are so incredibly corrupt in South Africa now, and very few of the police there who are white dare even try to arrest anyone. Is that pretty much an accurate statement?
Yeah, it's total chaos with the police. They lost also a lot of weapons. I mean, it's unheard of if you're a military man or in the police force in a normal civilized Western country. Here, it's nothing. And that's why we've got this problem with crime. But they want to limit the normal law-abiding citizen with weapons, but they can't even look after their weapons. Just this week, we teach our girls to not stop at traffic lights late at night, because we've got a lot of bogus police officers that pulls people down and robs them or hijacks them. And this girl, they tried to pull her down. She's been robbed actually in February, and those police officers told her, don't stop next time it happens. And this week she didn't stop, and she went to the nearest gas station, and these police that chased her pulled her out the car and then totally manhandled her, or woman-handled her. So it was big news over here this week. But I also just want to say, Dan, coming just mentioning with Harry's point, with all those dots and things that happened, we see these same things, as you mentioned, happening to you in the US now with the media. And we lost the propaganda war. If people knew what was happening to us and they got a fair, balanced news report, we probably wouldn't be in the situation right now. We would have had more support. But the fake news that pushed that propaganda in the 80s to the international community and to well-meaning Americans to support the anti-apartheid movement, those same guys are now pushing for the destruction of America. Mm-hmm. Luckily, you're a majority. We're a minority. We didn't stand a chance. And on top of that, we've got the internet today.
This is why, like me, I watch television here in Canada. I see what's happening in the United States, and I feel like I want to scream. I want to throw my pillow at the TV. I feel all the time like I got to scream, "Wake up! Damn it! Wake up! Mm-hmm. Why can't you see what's happening? Why don't you just take $1,500 and go and look at South Africa? I'll go there with you on my own nickel and go and show you what reality looks like. Wake up."
Yeah, but on top of that, Harry, they'll go to Cape Town. And I think, this is reality.
I would go to Somerset East, to Tarkastad. I was there. I just met somebody in the street. They said, "Come over to my place." Halfway into a cup of tea, the lady just collapsed in tears. Okay? You look at the town. It's falling apart. You drive through the northern Free State, through a place like Windburg that was central in our history. The middle of the town is physically collapsing.
Harry, if I might interject here, one of the things that we've talked about on Patriot Soapbox is South Africa is I really believe that it's the test run for how they were going to bring down the United States.
It's the canary in the coal mine.
Yes, it is.
There's another thread running here that I think Dan probably feels more strongly about because he's been watching it for longer. I'm a newcomer to it, and as a scientist, I'm still looking for more evidence. But George Soros, who funds so many of the badly negative things in the United States, or should I say badly far left things.
Well, not just the United States, it's worldwide.
It's worldwide. And in particular, he's got his fingers into South Africa. One of his advisors is Cyril Ramaphosa, the present president of South Africa. And Dan knows very well that so many of the things that folks are worried about started sometime before the 1899 Great Boer War in South Africa with people like Cecil John Rhodes and folks who came after him. And there is at least a group of people who are convinced that this monster that stalks the West was born in South Africa sometime in the late 1800s and has been kept alive. Now, I have...
Harry, I want to interrupt just to say something to that. I think it was actually born in Great Britain, but they funded themselves with the natural resources that were available in South Africa. And as a result, they ended up creating a beast in South Africa that was intended to rule the world. I mean, Rhodes said openly that he wanted the English to run the world, to control the world, and that he would fund that through his various means that came out of South Africa, out of the diamond mines, out of the gold, out of all the resources down there. Yeah. Okay, now it's your turn.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that there's a broad feeling that monster is very much alive and in the hands of George Soros. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that particular monster bit my people in 1899, with the British eventually resorting to concentration camps. And the collection of images that I'm labeled image 6A to D shows you what was done to us. Okay, now I didn't want that to hijack the show. We can go there if you're interested. We don't have to go there. But the point is that we've lived through the concentration camp nightmare as a result of that. That is where this monster goes. And we've been there once already. We know what this animal smells like. That's what the Brits did. They just shot all the animals. It was a scorched earth policy. You can go to the next shot very quickly. And so it was a plan of total scorched earth. They burned the homes, threw the people out, then carted them into concentration camps. The next picture will show you what happens when you're on that prairie that I mentioned earlier, and the snow comes in winter and you're sitting in a tented concentration camp. That's the next picture after this one. There you go. Thin little army tents. You know, these are just tents that were used for moving from A to B. It was not supposed to be accommodation, but they put the women and children in these things. And yes, that white stuff that you see, it's known as snow. It actually happens in South Africa on the ground, okay, which folks have a hard time getting used to. Yes, as I said already, it snows in South Africa. And that is what was done to Elizabeth van Zyl. Her father dared to still be in the field fighting, so those kids whose parents were still fighting, the Brits put them on half rations. That's what happened. That's what it looks like, guys. Okay? Please understand the monster that is stalking you. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much time I spent looking at TV here and feeling like, can't you damn well just understand this beast that is stalking you in America? I feel like the Republicans are being too nice. They need to learn to play dirty. Yeah, I think that the guys against them are using every filthy trick in the book, and you need to understand we were taken down by all the filthy tricks. If you don't start to learn to play a big man's game, you're going to go under. You will go under.
And Harry, I have to say this as a Republican myself, the party is also infested with these left-wing progressives, and the party is being co-opted. The Republican Party is being co-opted by the same people that totally control the Democrat Party. So the reality is we're fighting a beast that is trying to play all sides of the game, and they're doing a very good job of it.
Yeah, this is why a guy like me, you know, with what I've lived through, let me just be clear. I wonder, just to make this point, is there a chance that Thumper could show us image 13? That might actually explain something. I had to shake hands with a guy who bombed my mother's apartment. That's him. That's Joe Modise. in the so-called New South Africa after 1994, he became the Minister of Defense, what you would call Secretary of Defense. That is him visiting the United States. That is your honor guard for him, okay? Not my picture. I didn't take it. That's a White House photographer that did that, I think. So my comment is, I was minding my own business in our R&D organization when I was called out to the conference center saying that we have a visitor, they need to meet with you and some of the other R&D chiefs, and a screen door opens up and in walks Joe Modise and shakes hands with all of us. So he and I looked at each other. The other guys were English speaking. I had a distinctly Afrikaans accent, so he knew what he was shaking the hands of. So I shook the hands of this guy, or the hand of this guy. I shook hands with a man who sent people to kill my mother. Okay? And I thought, well, okay, it's a new South Africa. Let's give this a shot. Look what they have done. So there is a recipe here, guys. Listen to me nice and carefully. Do not shake the hand of the guy who tried to kill your mother.
I agree. It's time to quit trying to play the nice guy. It's time to start realizing we are losing our country, and unless we stand up, no one else is going to do it.
I have one phrase for that. No more Romneys.
Yeah, no more Romneys. Amen. Hendrik, talk a little bit more, if you would, about some of the things that are going on in the employment venue in South Africa. I know you're concerned about the fact that if you're a white man, you're having a hard time even finding work just because the deck is stacked so heavily against you. But talk about, in general, how the unions and how the employment in South Africa has changed under the ANC.
Okay, Dan, first, maybe just show that link there, Thumper. Maybe I'll start with where Harry left off there with Ramaphosa as well. It's the last one.
Coming up.
Yeah.
There you go.
So, yeah, this was the ANC and Ramaphosa's 1994 plan for whites. Now, I believe everything that's happening now is basically the ANC's plan from the start, from 1994. And what he said was, it was one of the memoirs that he said, maybe if you scroll a bit down there, he said Ramaphosa told one of these high-profile doctors in his memoir, he said, Ramaphosa told me of the ANC's 25-year strategy to deal with the whites. It would be like boiling a frog alive, which is done by raising the temperature very slowly. Being cold-blooded, the frog does not notice a slow temperature increase, but if the temperature is raised suddenly, the frog will jump out of the water. He meant that the black majority would pass laws transferring wealth, land, and economic power from the white to black slowly and incrementally until the whites lost all they had gained in South Africa, but without taking too much from them at any given time to cause them to rebel or fight. And I can see that's what's happening in the US with the left as well. They're doing it little by little. The people are struggling. We're sitting with about 600,000 whites in displacement camps, or white squatter camps, if you would call it. Now, that's nearly 1/3 of our population. They've scattered all over the country. Not many people, or even the media, wants to talk about it because, of course, it's not politically correct. But Ramaphosa even said this year they want to aggressively push this black economic empowerment in the workplace. And from the areas that I moved and the people I meet, you can see people, especially the white people, our middle class is shrinking at a tremendous rate. Now, we've got to remember, before apartheid, we didn't have a middle class. You only had poor people and you had rich people. If you want to say the good thing that apartheid did was create a white middle class. And the ANC has now the blacks surpassed the white middle class in South Africa. But basically what they did was they did it at our expense to get this white middle class. So if you move around in the companies, it does not represent the demographics of the company or the country. So people are struggling. A lot of the women here, white women, the women might still work, but the man would be unemployed at home. So the women are keeping the pot cooking. And
can you, I think you need to explain black economic empowerment legislation. Folks generally cannot believe that this is true, but I think they need to hear it from somebody in South Africa. So really, Hendrik, if you could just explain to the guys what that is, because I'm not sure an American can get his head around it.
All right, I'll do my best to that, Harry, but you can also add in there some of the, let me just get the black economic empowerment. You've got affirmative action like in the US, and that's on a lower scale. But for the black economic empowerment, that is a more of extreme affirmative action. Just an example, for companies, if you start a company as an entrepreneur, as a white person, you need to have a black shareholder in there, and he can walk away with half of the company. So all our entrepreneurs that's got their own businesses, family businesses, white businesses, it's got to have black people in now, which is creating more poverty. These guys are not pulling their weight. Maybe you could just add there more, Harry.
Well, yeah, the essence of it is that for each sector of the economy, there is a sort of a sliding scale that's been developed that says you have to have this proportion of black employees, you have to have this proportion of them in this kind of position, so many at the top, so much black shareholding, etc., etc. All of that makes that the bigger companies who would normally have gone for state tenders, well, let me back off a little. Americans have a hard time with this because there's a lot of cash in America. It's easy to agglomerate capital in one place, go there and get some of it on a business basis. But in smaller countries like South Africa, if you want major capital formation, you can't really do it without the government being involved. So government tenders are a big deal in a mid-sized economy, unlike the US where you can go and get that from a big IBM or AT&T or whatever. There are no such big companies in South Africa that can fund such things as big capital projects. So much of that happens from the government. And the government's rules now, this is where the BEE comes in, is that in order to qualify for such tenders, the companies who would submit for the tenders would have to have a certain racial profile. One of the items, for example, in that profile is that they must show that they are buying to a certain degree only from smaller companies that have a suitable profile as well. And when you get down to the littlest company, it basically boils down to, if you are a white guy and you're forming this company, having now lost your job at the big place because you're not black, having lost every other opportunity in life, you're now left with starting your own company. You're now basically told that if you're going to be so nasty as to have a turnover, what's the revenue is the term you use. If your revenues are above, I think, 1 million rand, which is a nickel and a dime in American terms, then you must show a 50% black shareholding. Otherwise, the bigger company that you're reliant on for your business is not going to buy from you because the government nails it for buying from you. So this thing is pushed down through the system so that even if you go and try to build your own life, you can't do it because you got to keep this black guy that you're going to find somewhere I don't know where you're going to find him, but he's going to basically sit down there, relax and enjoy life. He's going to freeload on you, and you're going to work twice as hard to keep his family in cheese. Okay, explain to me in what universe this is even vaguely fair. And people don't understand that that's the situation in that country. Okay.
And Harry, isn't there a different tax structure based on the number of the percentage of black ownership? Don't you pay a higher rate of taxes?
I don't know, Dan. I can only comment on that bit which I do know, and taxes I know almost nothing about right now. So you'll have to forgive me for that.
Okay.
But the basic BEE thing works with putting pressure on the large companies to put pressure all the way down the line until the little guy has no hope. Okay, and that is why you've got major chunks of the white population now ending up, in squatter camps, where they get told that they don't qualify for government support. Mm-hmm. So there's no food stamp for them.
I'll give you.
It sounds like our veterans here in the United States and many of the middle class folks that are facing the same thing here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that moved in the corporate environment. What they do is many of these companies, like Harry mentioned, they actually get points for this BE. The more black people or these disadvantaged type of people they employ, which is a majority, the more points they get and more contracts they get. So what they do is they employ, for instance, black people as permanent employees in a company. But the whites need to work as contractors. So you work your butt off as a contractor, and the permanent guy just comes in and just do his job or whatever. But a lot of those guys aren't making the company grow. It's the outsourced company, the white guys, it's being contractors and outsourced. It's pushing the company growth. And I've seen this everywhere in these corporate companies. I know during apartheid, Harry, they wanted to fine companies that supported apartheid. I think in the future we need to fine these companies that supported this black race ideology.
There is no fight against racism on this planet. All there is a fight against whites. So the point is, guys, that if you look at South Africa today, yes, there's a lot of white folks left over there. Many of them, if not today, possibly the majority, work on a contracted basis to the place where they used to work before. The permanent positions are now filled by black people who are hired because these companies, many of them being parastatal, in other words, started by the state and under control of that ANC government, they're basically employment agencies. They employ voters who then sit there, do largely nothing, things fall over, break, and then there are certain things that have to be kept running. So what you do is you hire back the white guys as consultants because you then don't have to explain how they are on your benefit scheme and blah, 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 blah. So the white guy basically works as a contractor, and the black folks are hired but don't actually have to work. They just need to be there. And that's it. And they know they just need to be there.
Yeah. Kind of sounds like the federal government jobs.
It's like your nightmare. It's like your nightmare of a socialist America on steroids. I keep telling folks, $1,500 will pay for the airfare. Come with me and take a look at reality. This is what it looks like. They do not view That government does not view a job as something that has to be done to create value for which you are rewarded. They see it as a thing that you can use for graft and for corruption. There is no concept that what you understand as create value and get paid for it. It's not in their culture. They do not comprehend it. It's not even in their culture, let alone worth talking about.
Well, Harry, we've talked about that. This is great. Pull that up. We've talked about that in the past, and tribalism, and how the culture is so much different than what we would call a modern culture, because it's based on a hierarchy of very, very powerful individuals. A king, basically, or a chief, a tribal chief, or his family, and it has nothing to do with personal accomplishment. It has nothing to do with any kind of fairness or anything like that.
Well, Dan, one gets so exasperated that one doesn't even know what to say anymore. It's like talking to a rock. There's no comprehension from the other side of this divide. They feel they're owed everything. They feel they're entitled to everything. A government tells them they're entitled to everything. And finally, they believe with total devotion that they're entitled to everything. And then that government goes and stands on a stage and sings pow, 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 kill the farmer, kill the boer, and then the state president does it as well. What is it you expect will happen? This is the situation that the folks have down there. And because it sounds so outrageous, folks don't believe it. Mm-hmm. It sounds outrageous. It really is.
It is outrageous, but it's fact. And that's the sad part about it. Cognitive dissonance doesn't make it any different. It just means that people tend to ignore it.
The answer is that, in the end, this translates into farm murders. And then the media in the US just says, no, we're not going to report on that. It doesn't fit our script. So let's not report on it at all. And that is how CNN ends up interviewing Ramaphosa after he got the job as president. He got that job because he promised to take away the land of white people. They don't ask him in that interview, and this is Adriana Amanpour. She doesn't ask him about the thing that got him elected. She asks him all kinds of other asinine questions that I don't know why she didn't just lick his feet. It would have been a more informative interview if she took off his shoes and licked his feet. That's how good she was. Okay? Yeah. Not a single question about, now, Mr. Ramaphosa, you got this job because you promised to take away white people's land. Can you please explain that to our viewers on CNN? Hell no, she would never do that.
And not just take their land, but kill them in the process of taking their land.
Yeah. I just want to cut in there as well. I think President Trump, and I'm sure he will, and he said he will not leave this lying down if this government goes ahead with taking land. Remember you said earlier as well, Dan, we the canary in the coalmine, we are the social experiment before it is exported to US and other countries. I just got a feeling there's more to this land than just South Africa. If land is taken away, remember our forefathers came from Europe. And they went to South Africa, Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand. If this is successful in South Africa, what will be their next step then with the US and Australia and New Zealand with taking land back and giving it to the people that lived there 500 years ago or something? So that's maybe, it might be a conspiracy theory, but it's very well, that because there's more to this than just... and with George Soros having a big finger in South Africa, because in one interview actually says South Africa is the reason why he's doing what he's doing, because I think he probably got motivated when apartheid fell. And I wouldn't be surprised if F.W. de Klerk got his silver coins from George Soros to let the country go. I want to just, if you show that next one, if you just scroll down there, but Thumper, to Moody's Corp. And Moody's is one of the credit rating agencies. And we've been downgraded, but Moody's was the only one that didn't downgrade us for a long time. Just stop there. And isn't it interesting, George Soros owns 71,500 shares in Moody's. Maybe that's the reason why we jumped Moody's free every time. I don't know if you want to add to the credit rating, maybe, Harry.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, my immediate comment would be that Soros owns 71,000 shares and Warren Buffett owns 30 million. So probably Soros's share there is insignificant. But I think I think his involvement in South Africa is very significant. I don't think it's by chance that he's so enamored of the place. I don't think it's by chance that he's got Ramaphosa in his fold. I think South Africa is the canary in the coal mine. I would just like you to know the canary is lying in the bottom of the cage, okay? It's already choked to death. There's nothing left but feathers and bone. In the end, somehow, the real test on all of this is when they start taking the farms and the land of white folks, because that's going to be the most visible thing. That was the subject that finally got the Belgian parliament to react and tell South Africa, stop it. The Dutch started talking about it. The European Parliament started having meetings about it. The United States was remarkably quiet. And that stupid woman that was the president, the prime minister of England, I called her a sad facsimile of a seat warmer for a real leader. I forget. But she, Theresa May, she actually supported Ramaphosa with this. So I don't know what money as well. I don't know what got in her head, but. So that's the subject that will get the world to notice. And I wanted to share image number 18, if I could, on that subject, for folks to see, because it kind of illustrates some of the issues here that we're getting at that we haven't really, I think, articulated very clearly. If you look at the top left of the diagram that's now up on the screen, you see the old homelands that the bad, sad old apartheid government made for the traditional black people. You see them there each for each different nation. You can look at the bright orange, for example. It says Xhosa. The top left diagram, the big orange part near the bottom. So if you look at that, below Lesotho, that big orange block, yes, that would be the major group of Xhosa people, Mandela's people. Below them, you see another Xhosa group, which is a lighter color yellow. That's Xhosa 1. Then you see the green bits. Those would be for the Zulu. You see the purple, blue in the top left. That would be the Tswana people. You see that almost turquoise color way in the top. That would be for the Venda. And so every group had a homeland. If you were to go back to the map I have of about 1819, which we never got to, you'd see that that's pretty much where these guys lived. Mm-hmm. One can always argue, should it be bigger? Should it be smaller? Should it be slightly to the left, to the right? But there's no denying that that's where they used to be. There's no denying that. Okay? So the amount of land there and all that stuff, everything's up for debate as far as I'm concerned. But that's where they were. So they were granted that land, and laws were made that said white folks cannot go and start businesses and all kinds of stuff there. That's not their territory. That's the territory of the black people. So now you read in the New York Times and you listen to CNN and all these places, and they have this throwaway comment that, white farmers own 80% of the land, etc. Blacks own nothing. Okay, and you always get that comment about 80 to almost zero, etc. And this is how evil these guys are. I want you to look at this grayish map in the bottom right. I apologize for the tonal quality. The contrast is not what it should be. But that's the map of non-agricultural land. The white patches are the non-agricultural land. Do you see the correspondence with those old homelands? Isn't it just absolutely remarkable? Look at that big fat orange blob in the top left diagram, and then look at the corresponding area in the bottom right-hand diagram. The reason is the old homelands, if you're a white guy, ain't no way you can go and have a business there, guys. Okay? So what was theirs is still theirs, and they're just talking about the bit that white people have. You need to get that straight. That's what that government does. Okay? So it goes back to the kind of statement that Henrik made, where they say everything has to be according to the demographics. If it's 80% black people, 90% black people, then only 10% of jobs may be owned by white people. Okay? And on this map, they want to play the same game.
Sure.
But the bit they already have is excluded from the game. That's not up for discussion. And just for the record, like I say on the left-hand end of that diagram, including the desert west of the country, and I would still like to show you those two pictures because nothing works like a picture. The white commercial farmers of South Africa, the ordinary farmer, Joe Bloggs on the ground who is trying to run a farm, okay? With his tractor, he's got his John Deere and he's got his wife and kids on the farm. And he's got his patch where he's farming. Do I have those pictures? Okay, I'll, just to line them up, don't show them yet. That would be picture 2B and 2C. I want to show you what the east looks like and what the west looks like. So the ordinary white farmer owns only 21.8% of the surface area, and I can prove it unless you are going to question the CIA surface area figures for South Africa. I'm just tired of the lying. The lying needs to stop. Okay? If you ever hear anybody talk again about whites own 80%, just stop him. Don't even let him get further than what's being owned. White farmers own 21.8% of the surface area of the country using the government's own report and the CIA surface area figures for the country, period. Anybody who says anything else can't do maths. And I don't need my PhD in physics to do that maths. I can use a $10 calculator from Walmart if I have to. I'm a good smelly Walmart guy. I can go there and get one. Okay. We don't even have Walmart in South Africa, but we got Pep stores. So if you wish, we're smelly Pep stores, guys. So I want to show you what the West looks like because that's pretty much half the country. And you can imagine what happens to those figures if you take out that desert west. So the two pictures I wanted to share with folks is the one showing the Transkei, which is Nelson Mandela's old territory, where he was born, and then the area where my father was born. That's the Transkei, okay? Hilly country, lush green. You can just strew your corn pips on the ground, kick them over, and they'll grow. Okay, and they do. You can see, for example, the bottom left, you can see the huts there have what we call millies and you call corn. They got enough corn there for the family to use. You are looking, gentlemen, at subsistence farming. This is what subsistence farming looks like. These are not commercial farmers. These are subsistence farmers. That's how they have lived for centuries. And that's pretty much what Africa works like. There is no grain silo there. Okay, and now the next picture is image 2C, which is the Karoo where my father was born. Now, I would like to invite you to come with me and go and stand on that same hill where I took that picture, and then you put the corn pip down there, and I will even give you a thing full of water to pour on it, and then we can all see whether it even comes up. Okay? Because in that area, you farm with ostriches and goats.
Well, and Harry, most of the big commercial farms that the Dutch have down there, that the Afrikaners have, they have done all the improvements that are necessary if they do have irrigation, if they do have improvements that allow them to actually make productive use of the land, it's because of all the improvements they put on those farms.
Well, yes.
I mean, they weren't there naturally. They weren't there to begin with, right?
Yeah, guys, what happened is that just after what I call the Mfekane, maybe what we could do, if we still have a minute left, looks like we do have like 2 minutes or so. If we could go to image 4A and then 4B in succession, that would show the situation very nicely, I think. So image 4A is going to show you the distribution of the black folks in South Africa. Oh, all the colors are gone in my version, but if you, the brightness is just too much. That's what I'm seeing here. But these folks were distributed, as you can see, to the east of that dotted line of mine, the 350 millimeters summer rainfall line. And in a big sort of a horseshoe around that central empty area where you see the words town written a little bit further down, it's blank. Okay, and that's that colder, higher ground that I mentioned. The black folks, there's nothing wrong with them. They're perfectly decent. They just don't have the technology. You know, that's not evil. That's not stupid. They just don't have it, period.
Right.
So what happened is in shortly after 1816, I said the Zulus went on the rampage. If we can go to image 4B, it'll show you some of that if we get enough contrast in the picture. Yeah. You see that sort of purplish patch on the far right and the bluish patch in the, further. Yeah, that blue-gray patch. That was a Zulu chief by the name of Mtsilikatsi. He basically chased all the black people out of that part of the country. He chased them into the far northeast and way into the desert. And then along the coast where it says Shaka's no man's land, further down is a more purple-gray area. Yeah, that whole patch there. The guy called Shaka, he chased away Mtsilikatsi, who then attacked everybody else, but he also chased everybody else out of that whole region up to that Mzimvubu River. So he denuded the place around himself of people. His people stayed in the patch where it says Dingaan, and then Mtsilikatsi stayed in the far west. Each one had with him missionaries. Dingaan, in the end, who took over from Shaka, he had an English guy from the Anglican, well, essentially Anglican guy, but from the London Missionary Society. And Mtsilikatsi had with him, wait for it, American missionaries. Okay? And I think they had not quite yet realized that Mtsilikatsi was burning entire villages of people to death. But they had cleared out that interior of the country to the largest degree of people. What was left was reduced to cannibalism. I got terrible descriptions of the cannibalistic scenes that the missionaries came upon. And in 1836, our ancestors left where the Brits were because they were making such a mess of things, and the British governor was kicked out and elected to stay. He was on the side of our guys. But the British government in London decided that we were all evil, including the governor and including all the British immigrants. So the British government essentially made war on them, said that everybody was just bad, and so our guys packed their wags, their Bibles, and their families, in that order, and went up into this open area in the middle. There they fought with Mtsilikatsi and drove him all the way across that Limpopo River at the very top of the picture, and they defeated Dingaan and implemented the deal that he had originally signed. He signed a deal with our guys saying that you can have the land south of the Tugela, north of the Mzimvubu, that no man's land that I patched there. They could get that if they retrieved his stolen cattle from yet another chief. So he sold that land to them, and then when they came to collect, he had them all put to death. 100 men were killed. He impaled them. So he impaled our ancestors, and the remaining guys eventually, a year later, had a major battle with Dingaan, defeated him, and basically then said, now we implement the signed contract we have in our pocket. Thank you very much. So everywhere else, they made deals with the relevant people. The only ones who were driven out of there were Mtsilikatsi. And he went to Rhodesia, north of the Limpopo River, and lived in peace with our guys forevermore after that. So it's not as though anybody's land was, quote, taken. They seem to forget, these guys who are now making demands seem to forget that we relieved them of Mtsilikatsi and Shaka. How come they forget who it is that saved their great-grandfather's neck?
Well, Harry, I hate to say this, but it's the same people that ignore the fact that the slave trade from Africa was started by tribal groups that were enslaving other tribes and then selling them to the Portuguese and to the English and the other white men that would come and be part of the slave trade because they could make a profit off of it.
Well, if you look at the map right in front of you, right in the middle of it, the most northern red Christian cross, it says Tlaping. There you go. The Tlaping black people were living, they're a Tswana type of people, they speak Setswana, and they were living at this spot, and they were attacked by a huge army of black men, and one of the two leaders in that army was a guy called Sebetwana. And Sebetwana was defeated at that point and fled north with these people right out of South Africa, right into the horizon of this drawing, and he went and lived in what is now Zambia. There, David Livingstone, our great hero, discovered him, and Livingstone can't do anything wrong, right? I mean, we all have to salam when we hear the word Livingstone. Well, Livingstone hated my guys. He accused them of all kinds of slavery, and I don't know what else. There was never any evidence of that. But lo and behold, Livingstone has to confess in the end that he discovered that his great friend, the man Sebetwane, whom he had described as the best example of an African chief, turned out to be a slave trader. Okay, that's now after he had written all kinds of things in England and explained how bad we were, etc. He discovers, oops, actually my buddy is the slave trader. Okay, so it makes me think of your CNN and MSNBC and New York Times. That's who we dealt with. We've seen all of this for 200 years. It's new to America, apparently. Okay, but we've lived this, and we've died as a nation because of it. You are going to get wiped out as a nation unless you take hold of this monster that is chewing at you.
That's fair warning, Gary. That's fair warning. I hate to say it, but gentlemen, we're out of time. But Hendrik, I would like to give you an opportunity to say a few words at the end here, and then Harry will talk about your book.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Dan. I would just like to ask everybody, the way to help us is to word of mouth, to keep the pressure going, to be informed, to make friends over here with Afrikaners, Boers, to understand our history. It's very similar to American history, just as interesting, because our ancestors were Western Europeans, and so we've got a lot in common. I've traveled a lot, been in many countries, and I've also other people I've spoken to was the nearest people an Afrikaner will get to is Americans. So I lived in Australia and all those places, but it doesn't come near to America. Texas, North Carolina, all those places. And just one last thought. I'd like to, just say this one, Thumpe, if you just put this up for me. I've spoken to this lady many times. She was a farm murder activist. Also, we were doing the same type of thing online. Her name was Annette Keneally. And I would just like to bring up this moment that I could speak on your show for her and people doing this type of thing. She was, when I spoke to her, she was attacked 3 times. if I remember, and she didn't make it the fourth time.
Mhm.
So, and as we might be socially speaking about this, and maybe sound to some of the listeners like, things are kind of normal, it is really serious out here. And I gather even South Africans are living in a bubble. People are scared and they don't want to admit the obvious. We are living in
Denial.
dangerous times, and I think it's going to get worse.
I agree, Hendrik. I know a couple of young men that I met up in northeast Montana who are Afrikaners, and they were there trying to make enough money in the United States that they could afford to go back and try to support their families on their family farms back in South Africa. They talked in very, very graphic terms about the things that were going on there. And these were nice young men. I mean, they were both young men, and they were both very sincere. And they said, we are losing our country. We will fight to the death to save our country because we have nowhere else to go. And that's exactly what it boils down to. And I hate to say it, but we in America have nowhere else to go either. We have better learn to fight for what's right and what is ours, because if we fail to do that, we're going to lose our country. Harry, I want to give you a chance to promote Amabulu and maybe make a last statement.
Well, my last statement, I think, is more important than the book, Dan, and that is, your president, Mr. Trump, to me, I don't care how rough he is around the edges. I think that's all fine. What I do know is that with his advent, it was as though a light started shining in all the place where the roaches started to run. And I think that's his job. That's what he's doing. Somewhere along this line, some years ago, you asked me when he was new in office, you asked me to do a little statement under the title of Dear Mr. President-elect.
I remember.
I would like to follow up in the same spirit with that. And that is that, Mr. President, if somehow someone that is listening to this broadcast could whisper in your ear, my message would be, we're your nearest cousins on earth. We're busy dying as a nation, and you promised you would look into it. You promised you would look into it. You've done your best to keep every other promise. I'm asking you as a representative of people who are basically dying, please, just do what you said. Please. You're a decent guy. Just do it.
Well, and Harry, I have to say, you know as well as anyone that this is an election year coming up. We had better make sure that President Trump gets reelected and then hold his feet to the fire, because we've got to save this country. We're the last best hope for the world. There's no question. Go ahead and talk a little bit about Amabulu, and then we're going to have to sign off.
Well, Dan, I think all folks really need to know is go to Google and put the word Amabulu, A-M-A-B-H-U-L-U. Just put that into Google and you will find the Amazon webpage for it. You'll find the blog that's associated with it. I'm pretty much the Amabulu guy, A-M-A-B-H-U-L-U. And to maybe just give an idea, this is Nelson Mandela's book, okay, a classic 6x9, about 2 inches thick. My Amabulu, because I'm talking about more than just one guy's life, is rather bigger. It's about the size of a telephone directory. It weighs about 4 pounds. But the good news is there is an ebook version of it around as well. I didn't write this because I thought that it would really sell or anything. There's no sex and so forth in it. There's a lot of real violence that actually happened because it's a book about the truth and the real history. And folks can just get the ebook. It is in color, the graphics is better, etc. But in the end, it's simple. Just put AMABHULU into Google and all shall be revealed. Then along with that, the reason why I did all of this, if you can find Google images, and I don't know if there's still a minute to find it, but if any listener looks at Google Images, the website Google Images, just put in there, farm attack. Just put those 2 words in there. What you'll find is pretty much just South Africa, and you'll see what the stuff we've been talking about actually looks like.
All right. Well, I want to thank our listeners for joining us on Connecting the Dots, and I want to invite you to come back next week. Harry, Hendrik, thank you both for being our guests on this program, and I look forward to a long and hopefully very, very mutually fruitful relationship. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Dan.
And for Patriot Soapbox, I'd like to say thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here on Connecting the Dots on Patriot Soapbox. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Thumper.
All right. Well, that completes the show for Dan today. I hope you all got something out of it. I've been monitoring the chat the entire show. And I got to tell you, you guys were definitely engaged. And I'm very, very proud of every one of you that are getting in there and making comments. And it appears that a lot of people are not completely aware of just all that's going on in South Africa, but it is a very, very dire situation over there. And what we don't see is a direct result of the mainstream media not covering this. Why would they want us to know what's in store for us? Because that is exactly what this is about. They are fine-tuning their program to bring this to a city or town, state, or country real near you. So again, for Dan and myself, I want to say thank you to everyone who has tuned in this afternoon.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic. We're losing